Our first speaker is Don Griffith, who recently celebrated a birthday. Yay! Since his retirement from General Dynamics in 2013, Don has embarked on a new career as a professional genealogist. It's a good time for it because more and more people are becoming interested in their heritage. They ask where their family come from. Am I related to anyone famous? Is there any money in the will? I just ad-libbed that one. Even TV shows ask us, who do you think you are? It's a fascinating pursuit and one that has become more accessible to anyone through the power of the internet. Today to tell us about one of the most powerful tools used by genealogists, Don will share a speech he calls Counting Our Blessings. This is the vocal variety project from the Competent Communication Manual, and he is asked for 7 minutes. Please join me in welcoming distinguished Toastmaster, Don Griffith.
Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our very special guest, Dave. We just came through a wonderful holiday period where we met with family. We had New Year's resolutions, a lot of fun, and I hope during that time you counted your blessings. I know I did. But when a genealogist counts his blessings, he needs tools. And one of those tools, if you've looked on your table, you'll see a handout. You know what I'm going to be talking about. The tool is the census. Now, the census comes from the Latin word censere, meaning to assess. And in the wisdom of our forefathers, in the nascent stages of our country's formation, they wrote into the Constitution, you will have a census. Why? They needed to apportion Congress how many representatives from each state based on population. That was the initial use of the census in 1790. In the decades since, they've taken that purpose, and it's still there. We still use it to decide how many representatives from each state. But we now add statistical information, occupation, income, all kinds of information that wasn't in the 1790 census. In fact, the only thing that you could find in the original census was the name of the head of household, and then just a count of how many people were in that house. And in certain parts of the country, how many slaves. From 1790 to 1840, this stayed the same. You only knew the head of the house. You didn't know the names of the wife or the children. In fact, in 1810, and I'll give you an example of someone you may have heard of. If you can't read that from the back of the room, it says Paul Revere. He was 76 years old, living in Boston. And he lived just a few more years after that. Now, over the years, the census changed. It changed because our country changed, and the needs of the census changed. In 1850, for the first time, everyone in the census was listed by name, by age, and what state they were born in. But the genealogists weren't happy because we still didn't know the relationship between the members of the household. So if you saw a man and a woman, 3 children, you had to assume or presume that it was a husband and wife and 3 biological children. As you know, that isn't always the case. It wasn't until 1880 that everyone in the household was not only named, but put into their right place in terms of relationships. So you saw head of house, wife, daughter, child, nephew, grandmother, whatever that relationship was. It also included where the parents were born. So now, as you can see, if you're a genealogist and you're trying to track where your ancestors came from, this becomes more and more interesting and valuable. 1890. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the 1890 census because it burned. There was a fire in Washington, D.C. And there were two tragedies here. The first tragedy was the accidental fire, which destroyed a great proportion of that census, and some of the earlier records as well. But the second tragedy was 10 years later, when the man in charge of the archives ordered that all the remaining fragments from the fire be destroyed. Now there's only about 1% left of the 1890 census. The 1860 census in Illinois was very interesting, and someone had gone through the records when it was microfilmed and made a special notation. You can see the arrow. Abraham Lincoln, 1860. His profession, lawyer. If you notice that picture was taken that year, before 4 years of presidency aged him. It's a treasure trove. There's so much information available in the census, especially the more modern census. You know the names, the ages, relationships. You know where they lived. You know who their neighbors were. You know, if you follow from one census to the next, you know where they lived and how they traveled. Did they stay in one place for 100 years, or did they move west with the migration? What was their job? Occupations are listed. The modern census have other information like household income. Do you have a radio? Can you read or write? All of this information is now available. The census data, the personal information about the names, is confidential for 72 years. After 72 years, they open it up and make it available. So the most recent census available is 1940. 1940. It'll be 20 more years before I find myself in the census. I was born in 1951. So I'm going to skip the next one. I'll have to wait. I hope I'm around for it. I think I will be. The 1940 census, New York. One entry here for George Ruth. Any sports fans? Babe Ruth. You notice he was not the head of the household. His wife was the head of the household. And I understand that that's really true. From everything I've read, she ran the house. You may want to say, hey, I'd like to see those. I'd like to go search for famous people and look at that. Well, the resource sheet I've given you gives you some web links to go look. Some of them are free, but free means just what it sounds like. You don't always get as much for free. You can see some of the images, but you can't necessarily search. So if you want to search through 13 million census pages and just browse, knock yourself out. Or you can go to one of the pay sites like Ancestry.com, which I use every day, and you can just type in the name and it'll find it. There's also the Mormon Library down in Mesa is open to the public. They are very friendly and they're very helpful. You can go in and say, I'd like to look at the census, and they will take you right to the place where you can see the actual records, the handwritten records that have been filmed. Now, it wouldn't be genealogy for me unless I were to look at some of my own family. 1900, Wright County, Missouri, on one census page. My great-great-great-grandfather, Richard, born 1832 in Wales. His son, Edward Thomas Griffith, born in 1868. And my grandfather, born in 1898. 3 generations of Griffiths within 5 lines of each other on the census. When I found that, I said, ooh, that is great, and it's very special. And I hope you've been intrigued by my discussion of the census today. I hope that it's started in you perhaps a desire to know something more about your family. Whether you want to go out on your own or you'd like me to help you. Studying your history, studying your ancestry is a wonderful way to begin the new year. Madam Toastmaster.